All right. Good morning, everyone. We're getting started here. We're going to give it about a minute or so for everybody to come in. This morning, we're talking with financial consultant Rick Braa. He's going to discuss several different grants that will be available and loans that will be available to hospitality businesses in the next coming months, most particularly the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. And it is sponsored by IBA. He's going to give a little presentation first, and then we can answer your questions coming up. And with that, I will kick it off to Lex and Rick. Good morning.
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 Restaurant Revitalization Fund has been a really big topic with the association since it was announced. And now that it was actually passed into law, we're getting a lot of member questions. A lot of you are sending us questions. And that's one of the reasons why Rick agreed to this topic for today. You all know Rick is the leader of our advisory network. We've kind of nicknamed him the Hospitality Prophet, Profit, kind of a play on words there. And he has been a long time great member of the association and partner with the association. So Rick, why don't you walk us through this interesting restaurant revitalization program?
All right, great. So in the middle of March, we had the President Biden sign the $1.9 trillion plan. Included in that was the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. So this will be a little bit of regurgitation from last time, but I'm sure the questions have become more intense since it's been passed. So it was passed in March, grants up to $10 million, $5 billion set aside for restaurants that do less than 500,000, 23.6 billion. This is up from 25 last period. It was before it was passed, it was at 5 and 20, and the 5 stayed the same. Now we're at 23.6. So we got an extra 3.6 billion in funds there. And when we get around to talking about a recap of PPP a little bit later, we'll see that we've already surpassed that as an industry. We're sitting at about a 32 billion pull already for PPP. So the administrator can make adjustments based on demand and relative local costs. So if a market is more expensive, they may take that into consideration. This particular fund, one thing to note, appears at this point of the read to be first come, first serve. So this would be something that we want to be prepared for. My biggest fear is it's going to end up being like the first round of the EIDL, where it was an absolute mess because of the number of people that were applying for it. Now they've become better, but this still is going to go through the SBA site like the EIDL, and be patient, because I expect when this launches, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, that it is going to crash the system like it has every time. So it's going to take probably a few days to get things going. The good news is they've given about 21 days of priority to small businesses owned and controlled by women. And just a little clarity, someone asked the question, if my business is at 50% women, do I qualify? The last read that I had, it was 51%. So just a little bit of clarity around that. Again, check with your attorney to see if there's any clarity around that. Veterans, socially and economically disadvantaged small businesses. So in those kind of targeted areas, and you know where you're at because those small funds come at you a lot. So like a Rainier Valley Fund and different funds in different socio-economic areas that are targeted. A lot of times they'll follow the WOTC. So if you're in an area where there's a lot of WOTC activity around your restaurant, you may qualify. Again, you're going to need to get on this and see if you can get in the initial 21 days. The top bullet there is the uncertainty of the current economic conditions make necessary the grant request to support the ongoing operations of the eligible entity. And this is an interesting question. I've had this a couple of times because some people are doing a little bit better through this. Now, if you are better when you go to do the calculation, you won't qualify. But if you do qualify, the question has come up, I've done okay through this. I haven't done as well as I have in prior years. So what do I do about that? Do I even apply? Do I bother to apply? And I think my comment is this is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, not the Restaurant Rescue Fund. So the nuance there, I believe, is we want to take these funds and revitalize the restaurant business. So if you've done a little bit better and you do qualify, I would encourage you to kind of heart check yourself to see if you want to take advantage of this, because you can do a lot of really great things with this money. And the fact is, if you look at Brazil and you look at some of the other countries around the world that are retracting, we just don't know what those economic conditions are going to be going forward. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty around the current economic conditions. Things are going better, agreed, but it is one bad month from turning around and going the other direction. And you know as well as I do, we seem to take the blame up front. So it's one of the first things they shut down are food venues. So I think that we are in an uncertain economic period, and that we will want to take advantage of these funds. You can always give them back. You can always give them back. There's no harm, I don't believe, in admitting that. And if you can tell me we are in current economic conditions that are certain, please let me know, because it's very uncertain at this point. So just a little heart check with yourself. If you're sitting in a spot where you don't want to take advantage of this, and you feel like things are going in the right direction, or your takeout businesses in a spot, or your delivery businesses in a spot that you feel that your trajectory is not going to change, and that you're very certain about your economic conditions, then you can take a pass. But I think it's fairly uncertain at this point. And the middle point there is, if you haven't received a loan under the Shuttered Venues Act, this is generally applicable to nightclubs and theaters that have live entertainment, not generally around restaurants. So you're not charging people a cover charge to come in and sit in the bar to listen to the music if you have a live entertainer in there. So most people have not applied for the Shuttered Venues Act, and it isn't even live yet. So it will be live prior to this program going live, but we'll talk about that a little bit later and the crossover with the different programs. Okay, so this is a maximum $10 million and $5 million per location, and they carve that $5 million per location out in case you only have one restaurant. So if you have one restaurant and it's a monster restaurant and you're doing over $5 million for that location, that is going to be the limit there. So if you've got a company, and these affiliation rules are a little more binding than the other ones have been, so you're going to want to be very, very careful around this, around the affiliation rules. So maximum 10 million per company, and there's some nuances in the language that talk about affiliation rules. And this one you're really going to need to check with your attorney about. If you are an affiliated business and you have a whole bunch of restaurants, you're going to want to make sure that you have the clear and the go ahead from your attorney. So there are some very specific rules around that we don't need to get into, but it does have a lot to do with how you take profits, how much ownership you have, so on and so forth. So, and control of the business. So that's where we get into a little bit of an issue, because some people have management contracts for businesses. And one of the top CPAs that we work with said those contracts can be canceled at any time. So you don't have control over that business, was their opinion. But again, you're going to want to check with your attorney if you're in that business of managing other people's restaurants and you have your own as well. So sometimes you might have businesses, so you get up towards no more than 20 locations. That's really where this comes in. If you've got 15 locations and you're managing 10 for somebody else, that's where you're going to need the clarification from your attorney around your affiliation. It can't be publicly traded, and the grant is pandemic related. It's revenue loss minus 2019 less the PPPs. So special rules for newer businesses, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And again, overestimates must be returned, but at this point, we have enough good information to know what sales should be for 2020. So we shouldn't have a lot of overestimates being returned. Eligible entities: restaurants, food stands, food trucks, food carts, anything to do with food service, basically. And the one that I thought kind of stuck out to me was the inn, because there's a lot of little inns around the industry. So inns are also included in there. Your bed and breakfast likely would be in there as well. You've got brew pubs, tasting rooms, things that serve the public, and you've been crushed by this. You can be a part of this as well. So how do you calculate this? It's 2019 sales minus 2020 and minus your PPP. And we have some of our clientele that aren't going to be able to take advantage of this because they didn't do as poorly as many did. And so their sales minus their 2020 minus their PPP put them in the red, and they don't qualify for that. Now, those people should absolutely pour their heart into the employee retention credit because there's a lot of really great stuff, and we'll talk about that later as well. So if you're not open of all of 2019, and this came up last time as a question, the calculation with a caveat that I'll talk about here in a little bit, 2019 monthly sales average times 12 minus 2020 average sales times 12. So this is a little bit of a penalty if you open in 2019 because everybody else is using 2020 sales. But in this particular case, the way that it is written, and it can be clarified later, is that let's say that you were shut down for 6 months of 2020. You would take your 2020 sales and divide those by 6 and then multiply by 12, as opposed to just using your straight up 2020 sales. And so that's a little bit of a penalty because it is bumping your 2020 sales up and reducing the amount of the grant. But again, they can change that. If you open in 2020, at this point, it's eligible expenses, and they use the term gross receipts, which I'm using synonymously with sales. And by sales, I mean net of tax and net of discounts. If you're not open yet, you've got a business that is still going and you're not open, you can still get a grant for your eligible expenses at the date of application. And that's a pretty neat thing. So again, this is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. A lot of people maybe had signed a lease and they have ongoing expenses, but they haven't opened yet because of the restrictions. Those people or you can still get some money in this grant fund. I'm not saying it's going to be a ton, but it's going to help. Everybody's going to help. So the last piece, the caveat here is that if you open in 2019 or 2020, or you're not open, the formula can be determined by the administrator of the SBA. So they can change these calculations, as sometimes they do, come up with some alternative formula to make it a little easier, because again, they're going after the public with these funds. So what can it be used for? Payroll, mortgage principal and interest. That's different than the PPP because it has principal in there, but there's no prepayment. The security here really needs to be real property. So that's what, if you're paying a loan on real property and it's not a 7A SBA loan that hasn't been paid for you, you'll be able to deduct your principal as well. So that is really good news because the government's basically going to pay your debt at this point. Rent, utilities, maintenance, including construction to accommodate outdoor seating. And then there is a semicolon here, and it starts a next little section in the bill. And it says, and walls, floors, deck services, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And what we're taking that to mean right now is that does not tie into your outdoor seating. So that are things, those are things that are done on your facility as well. So if you need to move walls around, if you need to fix floors, if you've got some new furniture, fixtures, and equipment, I know that some of the things people are talking about air scrubbers, and those can be $20,000 a pop. So those type of things you can use this money for. And since there's going to be a lot of money in 2021 coming your way, it's something that you should plan out and think about. Supplies, including protective equipment and cleaning materials. Question around that has been, what about gloves that I'm using for the front? Sure, you can throw those in there, masks, all of those kind of things. Food and beverage expenses that are within the scope of the normal business practice. So don't change your concept. Use it how you've been using it. And someone asked me the other day, can I go out and buy a case of some really high-end wine? And I said, tell me about your business. And they have a high-end restaurant. And I said, if that's what you normally do, then you can do that. So a lot of the high-end wineries have allocations, and Over the last year, many of the groups that have allocations on those higher end wines have refused to take them. And now you'll be able to do that again. So with this particular money, covered supplier expenses, operational expenses needs more explanation. It does not have the word covered. Covered supplier expenses are calculated and defined in the PPP. Operational expenses are not. They are called covered operational expenses in PPP. They did not use the word covered here. So if they do not clarify that, that's going to throw the gates open. Paid sick leave. And the great thing here, any other expense the administrator determines essential to maintaining the eligible entity. Notice the title of this slide again. This is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, not Survival Fund. So this is an attempt to make you whole, as whole as possible. And then you need to return any unused funds on or before the last day of the covered period, and the administrator can extend up to 2 years. So I would expect in December that they're going to push this out based on how much they have dragged their feet already. I mean, it's only been a couple of weeks, but they've known about this for quite some time. And the Shuttered Venues Act is a good 3.5 months, almost four. Actually, it's now 4 months since the thing was done. 3 months since it was done, sorry. So we're at least 90 days into the Shuttered Venues Act and it hasn't launched yet. Questions, Lisa?
Absolutely. We've got tons of questions. First off, I know there's a bunch of rumors out there about what they're going to need, like DUNS numbers, registering at sam.gov as a vendor. What have you heard so far on what they're going to need to apply for these grants?
Great. So what do you need to have ready before applying? Now, the Independent Restaurant Coalition circulated immediately a document that said you're going to need a DUNS number, and then you're going to need to register it with SAM. And that memo, you can just Google it and you'll find that memo for the Independent Restaurant Coalition on the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. You can find that. The bill does not say that. It's not going to hurt, belt and suspenders. It's not going to hurt to do that, but the Independent Restaurant Coalition believes you're going to need it. I spoke to another CPA firm recently that specializes in federal grants, and they said that they believe there's going to be some desire to have this. The National Restaurant Association is using what is in the bill, and I think that's probably where it's going to end up. At belt and suspenders, it's not going to hurt to have a DUNS number and register it with SAM. But entities, here's what the bill says. Entities can apply using their existing business identifiers, as the SBA will avoid imposing additional burdens on applicants. If you recall the beginning slides where we talked about that $5 billion being carved off for minority and socioeconomic disadvantaged businesses, I think this has a lot to do with it because as one of our clients said, you know, I want to help people that don't speak English, that don't know about these programs, make me a bunch of flyers. I'll go out and pass them out business to business to make sure that the restaurants know about this. And I really think that it's going to come down to using existing business identifiers as it says. But the position that the Independent Restaurant Coalition has taken is you're not going to be able to get grant. This is a federal grant program, and the federal grant program requires you to have a DUNS number and register it with SAM. That's the position they have taken. Other CPA firms have said they know something that we don't, but I have to believe that the National Restaurant Association, who's been lobbying for this, as well as the Independent Restaurant Coalition, there's a little bit of misinformation, and the NRA has used the bill's interpretation. So if you do a Google, and if you would like, I can also include with the slide deck the memo that was circulated from the IRC, because it has all the instructions on how to file for these things and all of the links to do that. But one of them, what was the acronym that was used, Lisa? That
Sorry, was it the cage code that we
The
were talking
cage
about
code.
earlier?
So that is a question that's come up. I don't have a cage code. And basically, when you go to register, it will assign you one if you don't have one. So again, the Independent Restaurant Coalition has walked through this in detail, screen by screen, on how to register, how to get the DUNS number, which is Dun and Bradstreet, and then how to register it. Now, that being said, don't fall for the Dun and Bradstreet if you have no need for it. Don't fall for getting in their credit program and all of that kind of stuff, because that literally, you go in and put your information into their website, and they charge you about $1,300 to do that. So you do not need that to get a DUNS number. And you'll also, by getting a DUNS number, by the way, you will also receive a memo or a letter, sorry, every time someone tries to access information about you through Dun & Bradstreet. So it's not a bad thing to have that, because you can see who's trying to get at your credit and who's requesting Dun & Bradstreet information. So it's not a bad thing to have it. And as I said, belt and suspenders, it doesn't hurt.
All right. Well, let's see. How will the priority demographic groups be given opportunities to take advantage of the 21-day priority period?
Yeah, so they'll open the program. There'll be a big splash. You'll see it all over Google that it's open, and you'll go to the SBA site and start to apply there. So that will shut everybody out. I believe it says it's going to prioritize everyone for 21 days. And if you look at the 14-day prioritization that President Biden put in for the PPP, he shut everybody else out. So there's going to be such a bull rush for this money that I think they're going to need to keep the program closed for 21 days, and they'll disqualify you if you don't qualify. So you're going to want to make sure that you have your ducks in a row going in. And if for some reason you don't qualify in that 21-day period, you'll just reapply in the following days after that, after the 21 days. But there'll be a notice that it'll be all over the place.
How will they give priority to the under 500,000 revenue businesses?
It'll be the same, in the same bucket. I think you'll obviously, when you enter your sales in, it's going to route that into a different section of their website that says these people qualify for under 500,000. So that'll be electronically routed, and that's why you're going to need to have your tax returns and have your financials or your estimated sales ready to go.
When will more information be available for the applications process?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's as I was joking before the call, how everything has worked so far is when I asked a large CPA firm, when is this going to go live, knowing that they don't have the answer, they shot back and said, tell me when the next holiday weekend is, because that'll be when it goes. And ironically, the Shuttered Venues Act launches on April 8th, which is just a couple days after Easter. So again, as I joke, this is the anti-accountant sleep act. No rest for the weary.
Speaking of shuttered venue grants, one of the questions we have is they are planning to apply for the SVOG grant. Initially, one couldn't apply for that and the PPP.
That's correct.
Has that been relaxed? Will they be able to apply for both the Shuttered Venues Grant and the RRF?
Yes, that has been relaxed. You will be able to, you cannot apply for the RRF and the Shuttered Venues Act. Those are mutually exclusive, but you can have PPP and the Shuttered Venues Act. But you cannot have the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and the shuttered venues. And that's right in the opening second bullet point here. You haven't received a loan under the Shuttered Venues Act. And that doesn't mean go get one, get this Restaurant Revitalization Fund and then cheat and go get the Shuttered Venues Act. After that, you can't have the two. They're mutually exclusive. Just like at the beginning of PPP, you couldn't have the ERC and the PPP together. So in this case, you can have the PPP and the Shuttered Venues Act, but not the RRF and the Shuttered Venues Act. And what we need is a few more acronyms just to keep us on our toes.
Can the restaurant revitalization funds be used to pay back the SBA disaster loan in part or in full, or to make monthly payments to the SBA?
No, they don't want you using these funds to pay other government expenses. And they're pretty clear on that. So don't take your PPP and pay your EIDL. Don't take the RRF and pay your EIDL. Don't take your RRF and pay your taxes. And those kind of things. They don't want you to take one government fund to pay for another government debt.
Can funds be used to owners for distributions or dividends, as the SVOG is allowing up to 2019 amounts?
For salary reasons, you'll still be qualified if you don't have a PPP, because you can't double dip on any of these funds. So nothing can cross over with these funds. The most important thing, do not take large distributions out of this Restaurant Revitalization Fund. Keep that money separate. Now, there's an ordinary course of business where you take distributions if you can afford them in an ordinary year, and you can continue to operate your business as you have. But if you are losing a ton of money and you take this Restaurant Revitalization Fund and pay yourself, you're asking for trouble. It will be, there's going to be a lot of demand for these, and it will be bingo hopper audit. And if you get over a couple $1 million, you're going to be asking for an audit. One CPA firm says that if you get over 750,000, that there's federal attention that gets paid to those funds that go out that are over 750,000 per entity. And so that could potentially trigger an audit. But there's going to be so many of these audits. And then when they see that you're a 72 or you're something like that, that's been hard hit, that's probably going to get pushed into a different bucket. But we don't know. As I mentioned, I think it's going to be bingo hopper audit. They'll start with the big amounts of money. You get 10 million bucks, you're going to have some scrutiny. I'll guarantee you. You get more than $5 million for, you get $5 million for one restaurant, you're going to probably have some attention paid to you. But if you're a smaller one and you get, 500,000, 300,000, something like that, the risk of audit is probably going to go way down into the bingo hopper category, where the ball needs to be drawn out and said, B21, go audit them. There's just so many. These are organizations that are used to doing 40 and 50,000 loans a year that are doing millions of loans and grants.
Do we know yet whether this grant will be taxable or not? Will it exclude the deductibility of the expenses as the PPP originally did, but has since been amended?
Yes, it will not be taxable. Upon the last read that I had, the taxes will grant, it will not be taxable. It has the same language as the amended PPP does.
We do have a question about attempting to register with SAM. The website is very difficult to understand. Where can they find, they already have a DUNS number, but where can they find general answers to questions about sam.gov? I
think they're going to need to probably contact them directly. If we'll get you a copy, if you don't have a copy of that Independent Restaurant Coalition, which they outlined, we can get you a copy of that. But you're probably, if you're having trouble with it, you're probably going to need to contact them directly. I've had a few companies that had trouble at the beginning, but they cleared up pretty rapidly. A lot of the trouble has been around access because everybody's bull rushing the sites and shutting it down.
And are they distributing these funds based on gross or net sales?
I would say net, and you'll be the one plugging those in. So they'll take your 2019 tax return, they'll take your 2020 if it's done, subtract out the PPP, but you'll be the one certifying the numbers. So you'll be the one on the hook for the accuracy of those numbers. And it will be you as an owner not your accountant. So you'll be the one that personally responsible for those funds. So you want to make sure that they're right.
And as an owner, the questioner didn't take a salary for 5 months of 2020. Can they use the RRF to pay myself for lost revenue?
Yeah, I think so. Well, not for lost revenue, but for lost, if you had the ability to take PPP, but you didn't under that, the $100,000 and how it ties into your K1, line 14A. If you have earnings and you are eligible, you can use RRF to pay yourself. Yes. Now, I suspect they're going to come out with some clarity around that. Again, there's been no guidance issued around this, but I suspect they'll clarify that one specific issue because there are so many people that have not been paid as an owner going through this. They've made sure their people have been paid, but they haven't been taking any money themselves, and that's not a sustainable model.
The last question I have about the RRF is they get the revenue reduction qualifier, but they read it as it could also just be increased operating costs due to the coronavirus.
No, the calculation to qualify is revenue based. So it is 2019 minus 2020 sales, net sales minus PPP received. So for example, if your 2019 sales were $1 million and your 2020 sales were $800,000, you had a $200,000 delta. Out of that 200,000, you would subtract your PPP. So some of the confusion comes in around where people have thought, well, I qualify for the 10 million. Now I've got to back my that they max it at 10 million and then they take the PPP out. And the way it's written right now, you calculate it, if you're down 15 or 20 million, you take the PPP off of that. And if it's above 10 million, you're capped. And that's the way that it's written right now. It is not back it down to 10 million and then subtract your PPP. So the maximum is 10 million. So if you're off, let's say you're off 15 million and you got $3 million worth of PPP loans, then you would still have a maximum of 10 million. You wouldn't take 10 minus the 3 and be maxed at 7. You would be maxed at 10.
All right, and I have one more question, but it's about the ERTC. So I will let you go ahead and move forward in your presentation.
Okay. And again, this is still an uncertain time that we're in around the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. There will be more clarity. I just think it's going to take a while. They're pretty slow at issuing this stuff. All right, so I'm going to move on to what's available now. What is PPP, ERC? What's on the horizon is the Working Washington Grant number 4. So this grant opens very shortly. We're at the 24th. It opens in 5 days. They said the morning of 3/29, and it closes only 12 days later on 4/9. So this is a very short window. So you're going to need to pay attention and you're going to need to get this work done if you want to get one of these Working Washington grants. This one is more complicated than the other ones have been, more restrictive in a lot of cases. So we're gonna take a look at some of those. The most important thing is there's no reason to be up at 5 o'clock in the morning pressing the button, because it is not first come, first serve. It is a window that is open. The support center is already open. It opened on the 22nd, a couple of days ago, and you can call them at 855-602-2722, or you can contact them via email at commercegrants@submittable.com. And a lot of you had questions before about some of the ways that you were receiving funds because they were coming from websites, one particular website that you may not have recognized. In this case, they're using Submittable. So keep that in mind so that you don't start blocking. If you're communicating, make sure that you set up submittable.com as not going to junk. So if you don't speak English or are not as comfortable speaking English, especially with complicated matters like this, other languages, that opens up on 3/29. So, and they've got a whole bunch of different languages I think there's 8 different languages that they're going to have people available for, beginning on 3/29. Office hours for all of these, both English and other languages, 8 to 7 Monday through Friday, which is a great window, 1 to 5 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday, which I think is fantastic. So lots of opportunity to get in contact with these people, and the response is going to be within 8 hours if you end up getting a voicemail or an email that you put through. So that's pretty quick.
If any of you miss any of these slides, we will have them available on our website along with this recording.
All right. So where did the money come from? 240 million of CARES funding. 90 million of that is carved out according to the bill for businesses that were totally closed after the 15th of November. This is where it becomes a little bit different, because last time it was really around restaurants. This time it's around business. And then I'm going to clarify how many businesses are actually qualified for this. So priorities for funding: businesses required to close, businesses with lost revenue as a result of a closure, businesses with added expenses to maintain safe operations and equitable distribution of grant funds across the state, and to businesses owned and operated by historically disadvantaged individuals. So they need to make sure that this gets equitably divided up. And last time it was 12.5, that everybody got 12.5 last time. So this one is going to be up to 25,000, and there is a caveat there in red. So other working Washington grants received will be taken into consideration and reduced. So last time, if you got a 12.5 grant, your maximum that you're going to see is 12.5 this time. If you received anything above that 12.5 grant, that's also going to add in, because some people were available for the early $10,000 grants. So you may end up with very little, if anything, if you've been taking advantage. If you've been able to do round 1, round 2, and round 3, there may not be much there. So the way that it's written currently is that it's up to 25,000, and they'll go and reduce it. But it is also up to them to make the decision, the state to make the decision if perhaps this is a disadvantaged individual or business that they may choose to award some anyways. So it's worth applying anyways. There's no reason that you shouldn't apply for this. So industries that had to close as a result of safety and public health measures, the size of the business is going to be measured by 2019 revenue. And then they're going to look at the lost revenue between 2019 and 2020. So if you had sales that were better in 2020, you're not going to qualify for this. So there's that last slide on the last piece on there that talks about really serving the underserved population. So who is eligible? This is for-profit businesses or individual DBAs doing business as Washington State. So businesses can only apply for one per business, and that's identified by the UBI or the EIN. And you had to have been in business before January 1st and filed your 2019 tax return. So those should be filed anyways. And then you need to generate 51% of your revenue in Washington State. So this is not for out-of-towners. This is a Washington State grant. And this is an interesting caveat that they didn't have last time, is that you operate from a physical brick and mortar location. So that pushes people with food trucks out. But what they're really after is, if you're operating a business out of your house, you're not going to be eligible for this grant. So reported gross annual revenue between 25,000. That means if you did business revenue below 25,000, you're not going to qualify this. And if you did for this, and if you did over 5 million in 2019, you're not going to qualify either. And we saw plenty of that. And that is a true number, because we saw lots of denial letters last time for people that did over $5 million. They did not qualify. It didn't stop people from applying and receiving those letters, but it did stop them from receiving the grant. And of course, you have to have a decrease in revenue between the 2 years due to COVID-19. Who's not eligible? This is a huge list, and I've bullet pointed some of the things that for people that may cross over into different businesses in the restaurant industry: property management, real estate, professional services. I highlighted that for myself because it excludes accounting and legal financial services. So we're not getting any money for this. agriculture and aquaculture producers, such as farms and ranchers, because a lot of times they'll have their own programs. So they're excluding that. Businesses found in violation. So those people that decided to defy the order that was issued by the governor, shame on you, you're excluded from the program. So a little bit of a kick in the gut, punch back by the state saying, if you defied us, you can't get a grant. We're not giving you any money. Businesses that are actively engaged in current or pending lawsuits. Some people are actually in lawsuits right now, or they're being sued. You're going to get kicked out of this. Businesses actively pursuing a bankruptcy declaration, can't go in for that. And businesses that have permanently closed, and this is the caveat here that I want to draw attention to, or intend to permanent close in 2021, do not apply for this. When you go and you ask for grant money, it can really be painful on the legal side if you violate the rules. So if you intend on closing in 2021, you can't ignore this clause. You cannot take this. So if you intend on closing in 2021, no grant for you. Don't play with it because they're going to look and see which businesses closed in 2021. So the grant can cover expenses or costs incurred due to COVID-19. This is more restrictive than the last time, and it must be spent on costs incurred between 3/1/21, not 2021, and 6/30/21. So this isn't to cover old expenses. Again, this is a different program, and it's not to cover future expenses. So if you get this grant, it's got to be to cover, and the ironic thing is you're not going to get the grant until about 6/30. So you've got to keep track of those expenses. And then you've got to spend this money on those expenses. And it's not to give distributions to the owners. They're very clear about that. So it has to be connected. There's a 5-fold test connected to the COVID-19 emergency, necessary to continue the business operations, not used on government related fees. They're very, very consistent. So taxes, licenses, some people have asked about property taxes. It's tax, it's a government tax. No, it's state, county, federal, city fees, any of that kind of stuff, you can't use this grant money for. So don't save it to pay your real estate or your property taxes. It's got to be used on COVID related expenses. Not funded by any other funder, whether private, first time they've added that. So if someone, if you're funded privately, if you get money that's funded privately to pay for an expense, you can't pay that back to them. So not funded by any other funder, whether private, state, or federal. So no double dipping, no crossing over, can't use this for any expenses you're using any other money for. And you wouldn't be requesting assistance with expenses if they had not been impacted by COVID-19. So you wouldn't be requesting, for example, money to pay your property taxes, because you would have had to pay your property taxes. Somebody asked about insurance. What about insurance? No, you were going to pay your insurance one way or the other. So these are directly correlated to COVID-19. And then save your receipts in case of an audit. Notice that period is between 3/1 and 6/30. So you're going to want to make sure that those receipts, you keep those receipts in case of an audit. Now, we have no audit mechanism that we know of, but we do know from experience that the Department of Revenue does a lot of revenue audits, sales tax audits, sales and use tax audits. So the likelihood is they will tie this in there because it won't be that much of a stretch for what they're checking for. They're already looking at use tax already and sales tax already on purchases. Why not just throw this into the auditor's bucket and have them take a look at this when they're out auditing? And they're very, very active at auditing. As many of you know, you've had visits from the Department of Revenue to do sales and use tax audits. So especially if you've got a business that's opened in the last couple of years, you're gonna get audited. It's almost a certainty. So make sure you save your receipts for this and put them in a special folder that says that that it's got the date very clearly delineated between 3/1 and 6/30, that it was used for COVID related expenses to pay those bills. So this isn't something to throw into your cash flow. This is something you've got to keep an eye on, because you will get audited by Department of Revenue. And if they add this on there, into their scope, then it's going to potentially expose you, and you may have to pay it back.
We do have some questions that have come in so far on this.
Okay.
How does the Working Washington grant work for independent contractors?
So it'll work the exact same way. So you'll still be able to apply, provided that you have business income over $25,000. So it will be the same for independent contractors, as long as you don't fit in one of these buckets here. And it's restrictive. So take a look at it, because a lot of people are consultants that might be asking this question. And it's pretty clear when they use the word etc., that means professional services, etc. And I would say that consulting services are if you're an independent contractor and you got a consulting service, you may be considered professional services. So I know we are considered professional services. Check out the list.
How about Canadian-owned businesses operating in Washington State?
As long as 51% of your revenue is in Washington State.
Okay. And what is the covered period for the RRF and for Working Washington 4?
Working Washington 4 is 3/1 to 6/30 of this year. The covered period for RRF is 2/15. Is it 2/15? Let me just double check it here. I didn't put that on there. Okay, I didn't put it on there. 2/15, yeah, it's on the bottom there. 2/15/20 through 12/31/21, and the administrator can extend it up to 2 years, which I'm pretty excited about. There's nothing like keeping these things going and going and going, especially over fiscal years. So as I said, it took them 3 months to launch the Shuttered Venues Act, which still isn't live for another couple of weeks. And so I think, best case scenario is it's probably going to launch somewhere in the June, July timeframe. If we just extrapolate the math on what it took to get the Shuttered Venues Act up, these are all coming through very similar pieces of the government. So they just need time. They need time to rule make, and they need time to get the money out the door. So when will the program open? Best guess, maybe June. Many think it's going to be June, July. And just looking at it, I would say, mid-June, and then using a little bit of sarcasm, it's likely going to be over Memorial Day weekend, because that's when they seem to launch everything over the holidays. So if they don't do that, it has to be 4th of July weekend. So they don't want to go that long. So Memorial Day weekend, 4th of July weekend, or somewhere in between there.
All right.
And where to apply? Somebody asked where to apply. This is going to go through the SBA, by the way, just like the EIDL is. No banks. They may have some preferred partners that help with this, but it is going to go through the one portal on the SBA, and that's why I think it's going to crash for the first 3 days. It's going to be open, close, open, close, open, close. So, and it's first come, first serve. So it's going to go directly through the SBA website, just like the EIDL did, not through a lender. So, which is good and bad, because some of the lenders really had a hard time with PPP. This is going to go straight to the SBA through their website.
And Working Washington 4 is through the Department of Commerce?
Yes, that is correct. So that will be, you can just check their website, very simple, Working Washington 4 grant, and that should take you to the Commerce website, where it's got all of the rules as I've summarized them here. It's got probably 20 FAQs on there, some of which I've summarized, and they'll continue to add those as we get more and more questions, frequently asked questions. They'll continue to add that on. But I think the state of Washington has done a really nice job of communicating, making sure people are ready. The 8 different languages they're going to translate into. I've been surprisingly impressed with the state of Washington so far, at least with Working Washington 3. And I expect Working Washington 4 will be every bit as good as Working in Washington 3 and easy.
All right, we are running a little short on time, so I'll let you move forward.
All right. So just to summarize where we're at for PPP, 284 billion, we're sitting at 196 billion at this point. So there's still $90 billion left out there. They did extend it until 5/31. So if you haven't got that, your PPP loan yet, there's still time. Talked to somebody yesterday that hadn't gotten one because they thought they were going to close. Now they're going to reopen. So it's been extended to 5/31. At this point, the last couple of weeks, we ran through about 17.5 million each week. So it is continuing to decline into the teens per week, but it will run out on 5/31. So you still have time there. The sense of urgency is closing a little bit, but not much. We're just not chewing up a lot of, if we use that in a couple of weeks, we'll be sitting at about, 225, 230 billion used out of the 284. So I think there's probably a good month or so still left, just based on how things are slowly reducing applications. Employee retention credit, just reiterating again, some of the highlights here. Some clarification that's been given is if you already applied for forgiveness when the bill was first released, it's the bottom bullet on here. When it was first released, they basically made it sound like if you've already applied for forgiveness, forget about it. Now they've come out and said, look, if you applied for forgiveness and you turned in an application for forgiveness that was greater than 100%, and you used more than 60% wages, you can back those wages down. So if and this gets a little bit convoluted, a little bit difficult to understand, but let's say that you had a loan for $100,000 and you didn't use the 60-40 split and you used like a 75-50 split, you would simply reduce that back down to whatever you can use at 60% or greater, and you would be able to use the delta for the employee retention credit. This may trigger more questions, but if you've already turned in for forgiveness application and you turned in an application that had more than 100% of payroll and forgivable expenses, you can back that payroll number back down to 60% or greater. Just got to get to the 100% and maintain the 60-40 mix. And I know this is a little bit difficult to understand, but there's extra money there if you did turn in an application where you have more than 100% forgiveness that you allocated. We did one the other day where somebody had applied and they basically turned in expenses for 120%. We were able to take that 20% and back it down because they used almost all payroll. So we were able to back that number back down and actually get them some money back.
Does employee retention credit count as funding for the Working Washington 4 grant?
No. Just make sure you don't use them on the same expenses. So make sure that you're not using the Working Washington 4 grant for payroll that you would use for PPP or RF or the ERC. So what's that tell you? That tells you use it for other expenses. Payroll is going to be a little bit of a crossover. Again, this 2020, you have another question?
Oh, there's another ERTC question coming.
Okay.
Yeah. If they have amended their 2020-941, do they have to amend their 1065 K1 and personal tax returns?
I believe so. Yes. I believe so. I'm not a CPA, so you're going to want to check with your CPA on that. But there is a reason that we haven't filed people's tax return, and it has a lot to do with the RRF, the PPP, and the ERC all working together. So that would check with your CPA on that one, but I believe so. And you're gonna want to anyways, because if you get the RRF, it's going to screw everything up again. So if you've already filed your tax returns, just hold tight. There's more government money on the way, and you're probably going to need to amend it once or twice anyways. So just hang on to your hat and do it all at once.
All right.
All right. So just finishing up on this, the there's really been no other clarification around employee retention that we didn't cover last time, other than that ability to back down the expenses if you turned down over 100% for the forgiveness side of things. They also extended the ERC through the rest of the year, as we expected that they would, which means bullet point number 3, out of $40,000 not used for PPP, not used for RRF, that you'll be able to get $28,000 of that $40,000. That's a huge number, huge number. So that starts getting into what's the strategy around RRF, PPP, and the ERC. And that's really the Working Washington 4, that's a lot smaller. That's not going to come into much of this calculation or thought. So the strategy really needs to be clarified. You need to be really, really clear, because you've got to maximize all 3 programs, and that is going to give all of your accounting staff an incredible headache. It's really complicated because you're maximized to $10,000 per quarter, but you want to use some for PPP and you want to use some for RRF, but you want to maximize your ERC. So this, as I was explaining this to one of my clients yesterday, they really, it's a head spinner. They literally, their head was bobbing back and forth trying to kind of keep up on this. So really complicated. Simplistically, you want to make sure that you maximize your payroll dollars first and get 100% dollars, then go after your costs. That's a simple approach. But if you've got a larger business, it's going to get convoluted and complicated very quickly. All right, so next time we'll talk about the Restaurant Act of 2021, but unfortunately it's time for us to go. And the Restaurant Act of 2021 is a kind of a mirror image of the RRF, but it's way larger. It's a $120 billion fund. It's still in the works, and we'll talk about that next time if we continue to get closer, but it was reintroduced in February.